Howdy Explorers, I'm Joe. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to start our next series. Over the next few months we'll be exploring the Chesapeake campaign of the War of 1812 and its impact on Maryland. While the Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, I would say that the War of 1812 is more deserving of that title. Not only was the War of 1812 the only time in its existence, so far, that Washington, D.C. was occupied and burned, but also the War of 1812 solidified the position of the United States as an independent country and not just a rebellious backwater. The war marked several military firsts for the United States. The first foreign invasion by the U.S. Army, the first capital occupation of the U.S. by a foreign power, and the first real international dispute led by the U.S. The war would create several celebrities, some famous and others infamous. Dolly Madison became the darling of Washington society for her efforts during the destruction of Washington. Andrew Jackson rose to prominence for his actions during the Battle of New Orleans, a battle that ended up not really even mattering since the Treaty of Ghent was already ratified. And Francis Scott Key, whilst held on a ship in Baltimore Harbor, would write a poem that lives on today in the United States' national anthem. For these reasons, amongst others, I want to bring some light to this war, its impact on the United States, Maryland, and the people who lived during that time. We'll start with an examination of the causes of the War of 1812 and the larger geopolitical scene at the time, and then we'll focus in on the Chesapeake campaign that resulted in the occupation of Washington and the siege of Baltimore. I'll be going out to these places to get a feel for what happened there, walking in the footsteps of the people who conducted these actions. But first, let's get some context. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, the fledgling United States struggled to develop a meaningful foreign policy, and, after the French Revolution, had few to no trusted allies in Europe or anywhere else. To add to that, dissent in Europe led to the United States being pushed between France and Britain during these disputes. Further, the U.S. didn't do any favors for itself, attempting to trade to both sides and stay neutral, drawing the ire of both countries. In relations with France, this led to the Quasi-War, an undeclared conflict in which French privateers attacked American-flagged vessels trading with the British. This conflict ended with diplomacy in 1800, but not before raising the hackles of both the United States and France. Ultimately, by necessity of global strategy and a Europe-first focus, Napoleon was willing to sell the United States the Louisiana Territory in an attempt to get the British scared of American expansion and generate much-needed capital for his wars. Meanwhile, the situation with the British proved no less difficult to navigate. In 1803, Britain declared war on France. This conflict would last over a decade, ending about the same time as the War of 1812 in the U.S. did. In the initial period of the Napoleonic Wars, the U.S. remained neutral. However, increasingly victimized by impressment, relations between the U.S. and Britain deteriorated. Impressment was a practice of British ships boarding and forcing British-born, naturalized American citizens into their navy. To be clear, the sailors that were impressed were legally American citizens. Also keep in mind, during this period, most Americans still spoke with a British type of accent, and it wouldn't be as easy as it would today to differentiate between the two nationalities just kind of boarding a ship and looking. This, allegedly in practice, led to the British just taking whomever they wanted off of an American ship. Still, in 1807, relations would sink even lower, as the HMS Leopard bombarded and boarded the USS Chesapeake, all in the name of searching for, finger quotes here, British Navy deserters. End quote. Thomas Jefferson, then president, attempted to place all sorts of economic sanctions on the British. Unfortunately for him, it was not only wildly unpopular in the industrial north of the British, where most of the trade went to Britain, in the north of the United States, who traded mostly with the British, but also it really didn't do anything to the British anyway, because the U.S. had no way of enforcing these policies. You know, the U.S. wasn't going to blockade its own people or anything like that, and so the British were more or less just able to keep going as normal. In 1810, President James Madison threw more gas on the fire when he publicly accepted concessions from France due to all of these incidents to be included in a trade agreement with them. In the same year, a U.S. Navy vessel fired on HMS Little Belt, and as a result, the British declared there would be no compensation or an apology of any type for the earlier USS Chesapeake incident. In all likelihood, President Madison was already committed to going to war against Britain as early as or even before his election as president. Bad blood after the revolution, combined with perceived slights against U.S. sovereignty and a trade stranglehold, were enough for Madison to want to explore armed intervention. From the British perspective, an ever-expanding U.S. on the continent, allying with France and possibly Spain, was bad for business. To say nothing of the U.S.'s perceived meddling between France and Britain, this led to a powder keg that was ignited by the United States on June 17, 1812, when President Madison asked for and received a declaration of war on Britain from the U.S. Congress. And that's where we'll wrap things up for today. So now, with the U.S. having declared war on Britain and thus having the initial momentum, in the next video we'll see what the U.S. Army and Navy do with that momentum before we turn to the Chesapeake campaign and dive more into the individual battles and skirmishes that made up that campaign. My plan for this series is more or less to go kind of quick videos. This one is context. The next one will be 1812, and then we'll get into the Chesapeake campaign, where we'll actually spend a lot more time with those particular battles, and then move through the rest of the war. The tough thing with looking at things in isolation is that you miss a lot of the nuance and historical context as to why these things first mattered and second led to different outcomes they did. So I had to give you guys a lot of context as to why this war happened, and what will happen next as we get into the real meat of our topic, which is the Chesapeake campaign. So hope you're sticking around. Hope you're looking forward to seeing that. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. I really appreciate all of your support. As we go into the December time period, we're at 75 subscribers, which is awesome. Really appreciate everybody coming back during Spooktoberfest and tuning in for that. I'm still trying to hit 100 subscribers by the end of the year, so I would love it if you guys could, even if you don't want to subscribe or like or anything, that's cool. Just consider sharing the video with friends or anybody that's like interested in history or Maryland history. Yeah, just spread the word for the channel. Yeah, I appreciate everything I can get from you guys. Thanks. I was Joe, and I'll see you in the next one.